Hello, everyone. 新年快乐，各位大家好. Happy New Year, everyone. My name is Chou, and I am a veterinarian specializing in laboratory animal medicine. I currently work in China for a company called Wuxi AppTech in Suzhou. And as we are in the business of performing contract research, one of my responsibilities is to ensure that the animal models that we use are indeed suitable for research purpose. And so one of the ways I accomplish this task is by performing regular vendor assessments. And today I will share some of my experiences with you related to this topic, and hopefully through this presentation entice you to want to pay your own vendors a visit. And before I begin, I just want to mention that some of the photos that are shown in this presentation either came from my photo collection, they were downloaded from the internet, or solicited from my colleagues from around the world. So these pictures are really meant to illustrate a point rather than serving as an endorsement from myself or from my company for any products or services. And of course, during the presentation, please feel free to enter your questions or comments using your little click box here. And you may type in English, or if you like, in Mandarin. I will try to answer your questions at the end of the session. All right, and here we go. So the objectives of my presentation today is really to first review some of the reasons why it is important to assess animal and supply vendors used in biomedical research today. And certainly our goal is to control factors that could potentially confound your animal research and the data, but also for the purpose of quality assurance, from an animal welfare assurance perspective, we want to be doing this. Secondly, I want to go over some of the approaches that I've taken for performing vendor assessments, and with a focus primarily on the animal vendors and diet vendors, but certainly other vendors such as your bedding, enrichment toys. Some of those, the same principle will apply. And at the end, I really just want to stress this point that the reason we're doing this is because we want to build a strong partnership with our vendors, in this journey that we are making contributions towards scientific advancement. So it's important that you pick companies that work synergistically with you rather than against you. Okay. Now, we understand that animal research involves a collection of data from carefully designed experiments. And good research is really built on foundations of sound methods and appropriate animal models. So in order to maintain research integrity, it's important to be aware and try to control as many of these factors that, of course, can influence your research data. Next, for animal assurance, welfare assurance, you can imagine, caring for animals that you cannot use is really a waste of animals, waste of time, and waste of resources. We don't want to unnecessarily euthanize animals. We don't want to cause delays to studies. We don't want to accidentally bring diseases and pestilences into our facilities. And all of these, of course, can have significant impact on your animal population and on your operation overall. And so think about everything that your animals could potentially come in contact with. Like I said, the feed, water, bedding, toys, anything that potentially they could ingest. Are these products safe? Does it impact your data in one way or another? So think about those factors. And really for your peers to trust the data and the conclusions that you make from your study, and for the sake of future scientists that are coming up behind you wanting to replicate your study, it is imperative that you are aware of both human factors and animal factors that can impact your data, right? Human factors, of course, we're talking about how people conduct studies, but the animal factors themselves, if you think about it, not only do animals intrinsically have factors that impact study outcome, but also what is around the environment, the extrinsic factors. Okay. And so a little bit more specifically, intrinsic factors, when I talk about these, We're talking about animals' genetics, their background, their age, their sex, their immune status, their nutritional status, things like circadian rhythms, their endocrine factors. These last 2 points are somewhat tied to the extrinsic factors as well. And by extrinsic, we're thinking about the animal's environment, the food that they eat, the caging system that they're held in, the water that they drink, chemical factors, like I mentioned. Oh, I'm sorry, the environmentals, we're thinking about temperature, humidity, the light cycles, things that our facilities try to control. The chemical factors then is the food, the diet, the water, the toys, anything that you prescribe as a treatment, or you put into the test system, because of your experiments. So these chemical factors can impact your study outcome. Certainly the microbial status of the animals, the set of these microorganisms that they come with, and also what's in your environment that could potentially be added onto your animals. And finally, the stressors, as a result of maladaptation to either human manipulation or to some other factors in the environment. So all of this, it's a combination of all these factors that determines your research outcome, and then how you interpret your data then really depends on whether or not you take these factors into consideration. Okay. So going into reasons for assessing vendors, hopefully you think about all the things that we currently do to try to control our animals within our facility. Do you ever think about where your animals come from, or where your diets come from, how they were made? Okay. Certainly we think about this as one of the responsibilities of the veterinarian, because we're responsible for overseeing the animal procurement process to make sure they are suitable for research. And I certainly consider vendor assessment being one of these responsibilities. Internally, based on your institutional requirements, there may be certain standards that you need to meet. So internal compliance as required, that tells you need to go out and assess vendors, qualify them before you are allowed to bring in the animals or the products into your facility to be used on studies. And certainly you do want to make sure that whatever it is that you bring in and are used on studies, these products and services, they actually meet your study needs. Okay, you have to think about that. And again, I talked about building this trust between you and your vendors. Yes, you're buying their product at hopefully a good price, but do you trust what they provide for you is what you're expecting? Okay, so that trust component is very important. All right. So I'm using this as an example. You receive this white fluffy rabbit, in your doorstep, and it's accompanied by a health certificate that says clean grade rabbit, And did you know that it is possible to have this health designation, the clean grade rabbit, if the animal is bred in one of these 4 facilities, the one in the top upper corner. Oh, hold on, let me see. Yeah, so here, I'm not going to use this. All right. The point is that in any one of these facilities, it is possible for the animals to come out and be accompanied by a health certificate that says this animal meets clean grade health status. Okay. And secondly, what you want to think about is after you receive this animal, it's white, it's fluffy, it looks like a rabbit, but in Asia there are several vendors that actually breed and produce Japanese whites, and so this breed distinction, depending on your study, it may matter or it may not. Okay, so these are some of the things that hopefully you're starting to think about as you look at your animals and before you use them. And for me as a veterinarian and as manager of vivarium, this is probably one of the points I always try to emphasize as a reason for visiting your vendor. Without going too much into details, all I want to mention is that within China, regulatory agencies have set microbial testing standards for commonly used laboratory animal species, And they have established different classes of laboratory animals based on their health profile. So for example, conventional, clean, SPF, and azenic, okay? And for those of us trained and have worked in the West and in other parts of the world, I just want to remind you that some of these terminologies, don't assume when it's used it is the same as what you think you knew. Okay, so don't assume that an SPF animal that you get domestically is of the same health profile as an SPF animal you get from abroad. Okay, look specifically at the agents that have been tested. Look at the report, look at the detailed report, okay, and pay attention to not what's only tested, but also think about what agents are not tested for, okay, and then think about whether or not these missing information, how that's going to impact your operation. Okay. And so going back to the example of having clean gray rabbits, based on the GB standard in China, a clean gray rabbit are required to be free of these following agents listed on the left of the slide here. Couple of one virus, a couple of bacteria, fungi. Actually, no fungus on there. And tested for parasites, and this is done every 3 months. And this, in comparison to the PHLASA recommended guidelines listed on the right here in the table, it is missing a couple of agents, okay? And as compared to some of the vendors that I know from North America, my experience in North America, it is missing a few more. And so think about the potential impact this may have on your research, and make an educated decision. Okay, all right. So with that, hopefully I have given you enough reasons to think about, maybe I should be involved in the vendor assessment process. All right, and if you're just starting out, think about all the stakeholders who should be involved in performing vendor assessments. Okay, is it the veterinarians, your animal welfare specialists, your operation managers, perhaps, the scientists who are using the animals, some of the funding agencies? What about others? I don't support some institutions that rely or that place this responsibility on folks doing purchasing, because they are non-science people and they're really not in the best people to be able to make this decision for you, for science. So think about the key people you want involved in this process. And when you go and perform vendor assessments, you could be qualifying vendors by doing audits, or you could be going there to perform animal welfare audits. Okay, these are two separate components and sometimes are done at the same time. When you qualify a vendor, you're basically going there to assess the product quality and make sure that the vendor is able to meet your demands and the quality of the products they sell meets your expectation. That's pretty much it, and that there are paperwork to back up their practice. But the animal welfare audits involve a little bit more because you want to go there and assess whether or not the animals are being treated humanely, that the animals look healthy, content, free from pain and diseases, and that the overall operation complies with international standards for animal care. You may assess vendors by sending out questionnaires, or you can perform on-site visits. Okay, the questionnaires are useful when in the beginning you're trying to screen vendors to select, try to narrow down to a couple of vendors that you want to use. So think of it like shopping for a car. You do want to shop around and check out different dealers to see who has the best product that meets your expectations. Okay, and these questionnaires you send out typically contain, or you ask for information such as company contact, what is their organization structure, ask them to give a description of their products and services, brief overview. What is the size of their operation? What are their capabilities? Okay. Do they meet regulatory compliance? Or do they have accreditation status? Some of this basic information, their staff, how many staff work for them? What is their training program like? You may even ask them to provide brief description for the animal care and veterinary care practice if this is animal vendors you're talking about. And then you might want to ask them to provide a little bit of information about their internal quality control system, their program, to ensure consistency in their model or their product production. And certainly you don't want to make this questionnaire so cumbersome that it takes a long time for the vendor to fill out and to return to you. At the same time, you want to use this tool to weed out suppliers out there who, for example, if they can even fill out these simple questions, then most likely they're not going to meet your demands, and then there's no need to really make a trip out there to pay them a visit. So use this as a pre-screening process. And you do want to give the vendors ample time to answer these questions. And so typically I send these out about 2 to 4 weeks in advance, and then I set a return by date so that it's not just flowing out there. So you want to give yourself a chance to follow through. And as you prepare for your audit or your visit, think about what your study needs are. Based on your research, or based on the type of studies that you perform in your organization. What is the animal species, rodent strain or stock that you need, the age of the animals, the sex of the animals. Do you work with special disease models, some of these mutant models? How many do you need at one time? How often? Whether or not the vendor will be able to meet your expectations will depend on all of these. And also think about some of the alternatives. Like I was saying before, like shopping for a car, you don't just go to one vendor and you buy a car, one dealer and buy your car. You also try to not limit yourself to just one vendor, right? You always want to have a backup just in case something were to happen. The first vendor is unable to meet your supply needs. Research these vendors ahead of time. A lot of them have websites. Just go on there, check it out, and see how their websites look. And sometimes that gives you an idea of how professional this company is. To help you maintain your consistency in your audit process, definitely develop a standard list of questions for yourself to follow. Okay, and things like a standard list of documents that you want to review when you visit, and if you want, you can forward this to the vendor ahead of time, just so they can start pulling the documents together and prepare. Okay, and certainly you want to ask about restrictions, some of the policies, internal policies related to your visits. For example, when you're going to visit a non-human primate breeding facility, most often, or almost always, you're going to have to bring a proof of TB negative status with you. Okay, but some vendors will have requirements that this proof needs to be within 3 months or 6 months or for a year. So you just want to make sure that whatever documents that you bring meets their expectations. Some vendors may ask that you don't come in contact with other animals before arriving at their facility. And so if you're on a vendor audit trip and you plan to go to different places, then you might want to adjust your travel itinerary and your schedule accordingly. I've been to even one facility where the host asked you to take a wet shower before going into their facility. And so, just want to find out the details before you show up to avoid getting stuck in these awkward situations. Okay. The typical checklist items that I ask for, here they are. I usually ask for evidence of regulatory compliance, so ask them to show copies of operating permits. If they get inspected from local regulatory agencies, ask to see a copy of the report. If they are ALAC accredited facility, ask to see the program description. Okay, things like that. Organization chart, by looking at that, you can get a sense of whether or not the operating unit gets sufficient support from the management units. Okay. Ask for a list of SOPs and related documents, because you want to make sure that they are, producing, following a set of guidelines. Okay, so ask for the index, and depending on what you feel like, you can focus in on certain key areas and ask to see those specific SOPs. Or you can make that decision after you go on tour, and based on what you see, any red flag areas, then you can pull those SOPs and read up on it. Ask to see employee training records. I typically ask for somebody new on coming into someone new starting to work there, somebody who is experienced. I will sometimes ask to see the training records for their attending veterinarians. And you can see whether or not the company invests in the education, the training, and the safety of their employees through these training records. You can ask whether or not they have an IACUC, and if so, you can either IACUC or some sort of an ethical review board on site that looks at or that periodically reviews the activities on site. And so if they do, ask to see the minutes, and just be nice to have information. Documentations of quality control, so product quality control, either their animals, colony health monitoring reports. You can ask to see test results for the water, for their diet, etc. And I always ask to see their emergency and disaster preparedness plan. Okay, you want to know if something were to happen. Either it's due to natural disaster, or due to equipment failure. If something were to happen that interrupts their production, how is the shortage of supply going to impact your operation? So you want to see that the vendors that you work with actually has a plan in place. Okay. And on the day of the visit, generally what happens is that you show up after some small talk, chit chat. Your host will give you a quick overview of the company, history of the business. It'll talk about facility operation, and then a brief overview of their available products and services, and sometimes they'll even talk about the future directions of the company. And afterwards, before everybody gets up and go on the tour, be sure to provide your host with that list of documents you wish to review, so that while you're out there walking around and talking to people, they have folks collecting this information for you. And of course, during the time you spend performing your walkthroughs, touring the facility, bring something to write with you, so that when you see something that's noteworthy, whether it's something good or something that alarms you, be sure to jot it down and try to be specific. And after you return from the tour, you want to review all the documents that requested, plus a little bit more, and talk to your host, talk to key personnel there. And during this process, while you're reviewing the documents, it's also a good way for you to assess the vendor's record-keeping system. Okay, whether or not they're organized, do they have an archiving system? And then at the end, before you leave, as common courtesy, you want to have an exit briefing and just disclose some of the things that you've seen, whether they be good, they be bad. Provide your host with your comments and feedback. Again, this is to help build that partnership between the two institutions. Okay. And at the end of the audit, the goal is that you want to find out whether or not this vendor's product or their services is able to meet your standards. Okay, everybody has their own internal standard that they set, okay, and also their needs. So whether or not they meet your expectations, it may not, everybody's different, so that needs to be established. And also you want to help the vendor improve themselves. Look at things that potentially not only will benefit you, but all of their other customers as well. So make those suggestions, because ultimately, we have the responsibility to push and drive this process and drive to raise the bar of the quality of the product and services used in biomedical research. So, and I think of it at the end, the quality of a product really is proportional, I guess, is dependent on the actual effort put into the production of that product. right? And so if you have a so-so standard, then probably at the end it's going to reflect in your research data. It's going to be so-so. All right. Okay. So moving on to animal production, I like to simplify that. And for the lay people out there, you know, the general flow of things, production is such. Okay, you have a breeding colony. You know, animals have to come from somewhere. So a breeding population, and this population has to have a regular monitoring of their health profile. Their pedigree information is probably tracked. Their production performance should be tracked. And there's some measures in place to prevent cross-contamination, whether it be against microbial cross-contamination or from genetic cross-contamination. Okay. And all those animals, once they're born, they go into a stock population, and these are the population that then gets sold to the customers. Okay. And then in this population, you want to pay attention to the rearing environment, you know, the staff that are working with them. You want to pay attention to the model phenotype and also the availability of these models. Okay, and before the animals go out the door, there is generally a quality control component associated. Okay, there's genetic monitoring, hopefully. There's health monitoring. If there are sick animals or abnormal animals, veterinary care is provided. And all of this operation, of course, is carried out following sets of standard operating procedures. Okay, and then as they go out the door, there's, you know, you want to consider the shipping, the transportation. So the containers itself, whether or not it's suitable for the species, the transportation vehicle, is it, you know, climate controlled? Is it properly cleaned out before and after shipments? You know, some of the biosafety measures that helps protect the products, but also protects this vendor's customers. Okay. So moving right along, I think when you show up at an animal vendor's facility, you know, I think first impression can be very important. Think about, you know, how you would feel if you were to show up and the vendor says, "I'm sorry, but you can't come in." Okay, so that lack of transparency, I think, then says something about their operation or the products. Okay, or if you show up at a facility and it's very disorganized, it's dirty, then that probably will be reflected in the quality of their animals as well. Okay. Look at the physical maintenance of the facility, their equipment, their rooms, their overall architecture, their structural components. And as you look, don't just look straight ahead. You know, remember to look up and look down as well. You know, look at the ceilings, the light fixtures, you know, corners of the room. Are there cobwebs all over the place? On the floor, are there cracks that potentially allows insects to come in? You know, and the overall maintenance of that facility, I think, you can see how much the vendor invests in their operation by looking at the overall structure itself, I think. Go check out the breeders, the different populations, how they're held. You know, you could very well end up in a room and you see, you know, a room full of IVC cages. And certainly if you have those IVC cages, look to see how they're handling the animals outside of IVC cages, and hopefully there is a you know, some sort of a biological safety cabinet or some sort of a cling bench used to protect the product inside. Or it could be inside a barrier room and you just have open top cages of animals. Or animals may be reared in isolators. And so, you know, check out how these different husbandry or housing systems impacts the animals, and whether or not they make sense for the health status of the animals you're trying to purchase. Okay, so look at their husbandry, sanitation practice. I talked about caging, their feed, water, bedding, how do they prepare it, and so on and so forth. Ask for those questions. And as you walk, generally, if you can, ask the staff that are working there. You know, ask them the questions about what their daily work is like. You know, ask them to describe for you, and then remember those key points. And then later on, when you go and review the SOPs, you can then cross-reference and see if what they say they do actually is what the SOP says for them to do. Okay. Look at how they monitor the health of their animals, their colonies. How often do they do it? What do they test for? What is the sample size they test for? You know, are there historic data available? reports of abnormal clinical signs. Are the vendors, are the technicians or the staff working in the room, are they conscientious about these clinical signs and then identifying them early so that you can start weeding out those breeders perhaps that are prone to producing animals with these abnormalities, and thereby decreasing the incidence of clinical signs in the whole colony. Ask about surgery areas. Do they have one? You know, if they perform surgically modification of animal models and selling them as a product, then ask to see that area. You know, how are animals arrived over there, and then how do they leave? Ask about their anesthesia, analgesia protocols. Ask about euthanasia. How do they do it? And then ask about waste disposal. And this is not only soil bedding, you know, wastewater, but also carcasses, animal carcasses. Where do they go? Ask about the transportation. You know, do they have their own vehicles, or do they contract out the service to a third party to deliver their products? For large animals, some of the key areas that you want to focus on will apply. And I just want to point out some of the differences. One is that for large animal species, a lot of the vendors will have this outdoor component to their facility, okay? And if it does have this outdoor component, meaning, you know, it's exposure to nature, it's great, but you also think about all the possibilities of disease transmission. You know, that's the result of wild animals, wild insects, well, they are all wild. So wild animals and insects that potentially serve as vectors for transmitting diseases. And if there's that potential, then you want to ask whether or not the vendors actually screen for them. You know, do they care? Again, look at the physical maintenance of the facility, the overall conditions. You know, is it full of rust and sharp edges that animals could potentially hurt themselves on? The pen configuration, does it allow animals to easily exercise and interact with each other? Ask to see the breeding scheme. You know, do they have systems in place to prevent, you know, inbreeding of certain lines? How do they select their breeders? When do they choose to retire them? What kind of enrichment do they provide for their animals? You know, ask. As far as veterinary care goes, you want to ask to see areas where they perform quarantine. They may or they may not have that. Quarantine, you want to ask about vaccination schedule. You know, do they do that? Because sometimes you may not want seropositive animals for your studies. So whether or not they perform vaccinations on their animals, what is the schedule, what product do they use, you know, where do they get that from? Are there any prophylactic treatments that you give? Some vendors will mix medication right into the feed and then they give it to their animals, which then would be bad for your research because they're suppressing clinical signs that you should be catching, and then it's also going to produce false negative results. And the last thing you want is to bring in animals that look healthy, and then after some time they start coming down with diseases and you have to treat them. Okay, so find that out. Go and ask to see their veterinary treatment labs. You know, where do they keep their drugs? What does their pharmacy look like? You know, is it a clean environment, you know, sterile, or does it look like a butcher shop? Surgery areas, definitely take a look at that. Whether or not the environment is conducive to aseptic surgical technique. You know, what type of surgeries do they perform? Diagnostic labs, you know, when they monitor the health profiles of the animals in their colony, do they do this in-house or do they submit the samples out to a third-party contractor? And, you know, every step along the way, ask to see the records, you know, look for the raw data and not just what they provide for you. Okay. Now, switching gear a little bit, moving to animal diet, I just want to mention that you know, food safety, of course, is on everybody's mind. It's very important, and for research animals, the diet is really a principal source of foreign compound exposure for these animals. We're talking about, you know, within these diets there are natural and synthetic chemical compounds. Potentially there may be contaminants that are found either naturally on plant material or as a pesticide residue from agricultural products. These diets may become contaminated during the storage process or during the diet formulation, production process. And there could be variations in the nutritional content, with each of these ingredients. And sometimes that variation in nutritional content can impact your animal health and the animal phenotype. And or worse, they have been implicated in I guess outbreaks in certain facilities. And so this picture here is really just as an example to show it is possible to see this clinical sign, which is hydrocephaly in rabid kids, and that could result from either vitamin A toxicity or vitamin A deficiency in the diet. So does the vendor check all of that? So again, just quickly, general flow of animal diet production from a layman's term. Think about the process, starting from the raw ingredients. So the raw material, your main ingredients, your micronutrients, these are the vitamins and the minerals, the storage conditions that they're held in, and then hopefully there's some type of quality control that takes place before they are used to produce animal diets. And while in production, they are brought to an environment and that is hopefully hygienic, and everything goes into a giant mixer. They get mixed following a formula for a specific diet and using different types of equipment, and then at the end spits out either pellets or extruded diets or meals, and they're packaged and onto the next step in the production chain. There are control points set up at different points of the production to assess the quality and reject products that do not meet the standards. And at the end, after passing all the scrutiny, then the product gets sent to another location and ready to be distributed. So storage condition, and then they're delivered to the consumers themselves. Okay, and so when I don't know how many people actually have seen how diets are made, but don't, how animal diets are made is very different from how, I guess, human food is made. So the environment is going to be different, the sanitation level, let's just say. So when you show up, again, look at the facility's overall condition and environment. Is it a giant warehouse or a giant barn with open doors and raw ingredients in bags that just sits on the floor and it's open, and any wild critter, birds, rodents can just come in and have a feast essentially? Or is it all contained in a nicely nice and secure warehouse where you require badge access to enter? You want to look around for evidence of pest control, because like I said, these raw ingredients are perfect nutritionally to keep a lot of wild insects and wildlife alive for a while. You want to ask about the source of the raw ingredients. So some of these corn, wheat, these grains, where do they come from? Does the vendor, the producers, do they even check? Okay. Look at, again, the storage conditions of these components, and then ask whether or not the vendor actually produces species-specific diets. Because as far as I know, you don't have just one vendor producing one type of diet. Most likely they're going to generate a whole lot of different products, and so you want to ask about whether or not there's a cross-contamination control in place. Look at the type of equipment that they use. Do they have an automated system that uses basically computer-generated, I guess computer-operated, computer-controlled equipment that mix various ingredients together automatically? Or do you have people walking around with little scoops, measuring things out and formulating the diet, which is fine, I guess, for some folks that may be okay, but you want to go a step further and just check to see if they have regular maintenance records on these scales that they use, these balances, to ensure that whatever it is that they're measuring is actually what it should be. Because for our research, consistency of the product is very, very important. So consistency in not only the ingredients but also the nutritional values of it. So, and the vendors themselves hopefully will check their products at different time points, and just be sure to ask about that because, like I said again, everybody's different. And as products are produced, what does the product packaging look like? Does it make sense? Does it protect the product inside? The labeling that goes on the outside, does it make sense? And as I mentioned before, for different types of diets, how do they prevent cross-contamination? Especially if the vendor potentially will produce medicated feed, some sort of a diet to treat agricultural farm animals. How can you ensure that some of this medication don't end up accidentally in your diet that you feed to your research animals? So I want to ask about that. Look at where they store their finished product. If it's like a high-fat diet, most likely they're going to require some type of cold storage to prevent the product from spoiling. Do they have some type of inventory control to make sure that they send out products and they don't just sit around, so that when you do order the products, you receive something that will expire in 1 to 2 months? So then that's really not useful for you. So some type of inventory control and tracking system. What is their criteria for product testing and release? Okay, so what is the standard? And ask them about what happens when a batch of diet does not pass inspection or it expires. What do they do with that? Everyone will say yes, they destroy it, but you just want to make sure that you're not working with these vendors' questionable practice where they potentially repackage that product for other purposes. Okay. And of course, think about what happens if the plant operation is interrupted, okay? Because if they are your only vendor and they stop producing the diet that you need, you're screwed. So how does a vendor protect themselves or protect you? So ask about their plans. For bedding vendors, I guess either you're working with shaving wood products, or you're working with corn cobs or paper products. Just out of curiosity, go and see where these products are made. Okay, is it just off of some guy's garage somewhere with a wood chipper and the guy's adding wood? And where does that wood come from? What kind of wood is it? Hopefully not treated lumber that they use in construction, because those will have some sort of a chemical in it that may or may not be useful or helpful for your study. If you use diagnostic laboratories for testing, go and see what their labs look like. Is it clean, orderly? What kind of equipment do they use? If they use test kits, what are those? Look at how they process sample from one area to another, and how do they prevent cross-contamination from occurring? Okay, and the reporting timeline. Okay, how long does it take for you from the time of sample submission to the time you get a report, and whether or not the lab has, I guess, whether or not they confirm positive findings for you, through other assays, or did they just give you the test results and does not provide you with any additional assistance, technical assistance. So then after your tour, after you jot down some of the things that you want to follow up on, go back to the conference room, sit down and review that checklist and make sure you are going through all the relevant points that you want to look at before you make your final assessment. Again, review the SOPs for things that you identified based on your discussion with the staff, whether or not what they say they do follows the SOP. And also look at their records. Okay, match their records to the SOP to see if it makes sense. And of course, again, ask to see the raw data and not computer-generated spit out sheet. What else? And as you speak with these key responsible personnel, the attending vets, the operation managers, tech support, on the side, you're really assessing their technical expertise, right? And you're seeing whether or not these people that you want to partner up with, whether or not they can provide you with scientific and technical support when something does happen. When you need help, are they there? Or do they just sell you a product and they say, you're on your own? And post-visit, really, it's similar to an IACUC semi-annual inspection, I think. For everything that you identify that may be a suggestion for improvement or maybe deficiencies, ask for vendor to provide you with a response. Okay, but be aware that the vendors don't necessarily have to do anything you say. Okay, they can go on to going back to their regular operation. They don't have to take your suggestions into consideration. Okay, we would like that they do, because through that method is how we all improve, right? But so with your list, generate your report, document your findings and observations. Try to be as specific as possible and give examples, and be courteous and provide your host with this list. Okay, and if you're asking for a response, set a deadline for follow-up to follow up on. And based on the response that you get back, it may be necessary for you to go back to the vendor and perform additional visits before you can qualify them to use in your institution. Okay, and as you, I guess, continue to use these products and services within your vivarium, in your institution, continue to assess the product quality received, right? You want to check the animals after they arrive. Look at the paperwork. Does it make sense? The animal's condition. Do they look healthy, or are they dehydrated? Are you seeing mix-ups of males and females being lumped together? Okay, that would be a big mistake. Are you seeing lesions from animals that may have been sustained? These trauma may have been sustained during the transport process. And if so, then look at the transport carriers. Is it that, or is it some other problem? Okay, and over time, as you use these models on studies, pay attention to any changes in their model performance. Because that could signify a shift in your vendor's breeding practice. And of course, product quality, you constantly want to assess, and things like you open up a bag of dog food and you find straw, and that should not be there. So that should raise a red flag for you. And anytime you identify these issues, these problems, you want to be sure to communicate with the vendors in a timely manner. Okay, and if you can, take photographs and document that. Okay, send it off. Okay, and at the end, I just want to stress again, we're trying to build a relationship, a partnership, right? And as an animal user, as a customer, I think it is fair to expect these following key things from our vendors, right? We expect them to be knowledgeable about the products that they sell and to be able to provide us with technical support when we do have questions. Okay, we expect them to share the same commitment and passion towards responsible research. Otherwise, they're not the right people to be matched up with. We expect them to be willing to make appropriate changes to meet our expectations, because it will not only benefit you as a customer, but also all of their other customers as well. And we expect them to be proactive, because if something were to go wrong on their end, we expect them to proactively notify us and give us advance warning, whether it be identification of a specific pathogen in their breeding colony, or equipment failure and shutdown, something like that. Okay. There's just very quickly some etiquettes about do's and don'ts when you're performing vendor audits, visiting vendors. Do be punctual, be on time so that you can start on time and end on time. Okay, be courteous in that way. Dress professionally, and be careful about how you conduct yourself. If you're kind of like mama hoo-hoo, then people won't take you seriously. Certainly, as you visit different places, be open-minded and be aware that there are more than one way to accomplish a goal. Okay, so be open-minded, listen to what they say, consider the options, and really consider the performance standard. Okay, look at your end product and whether or not that works. Okay, don't go to a vendor and purposely try to find fault or blame. Okay, because that really will antagonize them, and it's not a good foundation for building a relationship. Try not to discuss any company confidential information such as your client base, your studies, your budget, things like that. Okay, because those are company confidential. And certainly you don't want to be giving them competitor information. So for example, if you're visiting one vendor after another, don't tell the second vendor what you learned in the first vendor about their operation and whether they are good or they're bad, things like that. So, and at the end, just really think about why you want to do this. It's important because it is part of your animal care and use program, okay, and your veterinary care program, and how you manage that. Your operation depends on the quality of the things that you use, right? That makes sense. And then ultimately, are you confident allowing these animals and these products into your facility? Are you confident that they are going to allow your scientists to produce consistent data? Do you trust the data that is produced? And do you trust that the vendors are transparent and they're honest with you? So that's pretty much the key point. And if you do have that trust, then I think this working relationship can be can go on a long time. All right. So that is all I have this morning or this evening. And with the remaining time, if there are any questions, I will try to answer them. And I am not seeing any questions at this point. And so for those of you, I guess, joining us through through recordings only, if you have questions or comments, feel free to email me. My email address is listed here on the slide. All right. Thank you, everyone. Happy New Year again.